Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you please state your name and spell your last name for the
Curt Roberts, Roberts,
And where do you live, sir?
Canton, Mass.
And how long have you lived in Canton?
About 12 years now.
And who, if anyone, do you live in Canton with?
I live with my wife and 2 children.
And your wife, what is your wife's name?
Kerry.
And how long have the two of you been married?
We've been married 15 years.
And you mentioned you have 2 children, is that correct?
Yes.
And how old are your kids?
My daughter is 14 and my son is 12.
And do you work, sir?
I do.
And what do you do?
I'm a heavy equipment operator.
About how long have you been doing it?
26 years.
And your wife, Kerry, does she work as well?
She does.
And what does she do?
She's a executive assistant.
And do you know about how long she's been doing
I
it?
think about 18 years.
And if I could turn your attention to the evening of January 28th, 2022. Do you recall that day?
I do.
And do you recall anything about what you were doing? Do you recall what day of the week it was?
I know it was a Friday night.
And earlier in the day, do you recall anything specific about what you were doing that day?
Gee, no, I don't. Nothing stands out.
And at some point in time in the evening, where were you initially?
Excuse me? I didn't.
So at some point in time in the evening, were you at home?
Yes, I was at home.
And while you were at home, who, if anyone, reached out to you?
Michael Camerano and John O'Keefe.
And starting with Michael Camerano, how do you know?
I grew up with him since 6th grade. We're both from the same town, Milton.
So the two of you grew up in Milton together. You've known him essentially since then.
Yes,
How would you describe sort of your relationship with Mr. Camerano?
we're friends.
And does Mr. Camerano, does he have any children around the age of your 2 children?
Yes, he is, I believe, a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And his son and your son, do they do any sort of activities together?
They did. They played baseball together.
Now, you mentioned John O'Keefe as well, correct?
Yes.
And how did you know John O'Keefe?
When his sister and brother-in-law had passed, he had moved into the house that they lived in my neighborhood. And my wife knew him previously and introduced me in.
And the house that he moved into with regard to where his sister and brother-in-law lived, where was that in relation to where you lived?
An eighth of it, like not far, very easily walking distance, maybe not far.
And the house that Mr. O'Keefe moved into, who, if anyone, did he initially live there with when he moved?
He moved in there with his niece and nephew.
So his niece and nephew from the couple that had passed away.
Yes,
And he had a niece named Kaylee, is that correct?
yes,
A nephew named Patrick.
yes.
And with respect to his nephew Patrick, how old was he in relation to your son and Mr. Camerano's?
Same age,
And as far as the activities,
same,
baseball and stuff.
same baseball team. Yep.
So all 3 of the kids, played baseball together for several years.
Yes.
Now, at some point, did Mr. O'Keefe move away from that house that was
He did. He did. He moved to
moved to?
One Meadows,
And sort of from your house, where was that in relation to your house?
probably 2 or 3 miles. A lot further away.
A lot further away, sort of on the Stoughton side of Canton, is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you recall about what year it was that the kids moved over to Meadows?
Oh, maybe 2019, maybe. I'm not sure of that.
Now, at some point, over the course of through your knowing Mr. O'Keefe, did you come to know someone by the name of Kerry? And when was it in relation to January 28th, 2022? About how long before that was it that you met Karen?
Probably maybe a year or two.
About a year or two before?
Yes, I don't recall exactly.
Do you recall when it was that you first met her?
I think she might have came to my house, maybe with John.
Okay. Now, as far as, what, if anything, did you know as far as the relationship between Miss Reed and Mr. O'Keefe?
I don't understand.
Who was Miss Reed to Mr. O'Keefe?
Oh, girlfriend. Sorry.
Nothing is your fault. It's entirely my question. Okay. Okay. So, with respect, and just so we're clear as far as what we're talking about, do you see Miss Reed in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
If you could just identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing she's wearing.
She's seated right there.
And again, just as a record reflect identification by
Yes.
the witness. Thank you. Now, as far as their relationship, that, and by they I mean Mr. O'Keefe and Miss Reed, is that something that you talked to Mr. O'Keefe about?
No.
And sort of vice versa, as far as your relationship with your wife, is that something that you talked to Mr. O'Keefe about?
No.
Now, with regard to that particular evening on January 28th, 2022, you mentioned at some point that Mr. Camerano and or Mr. O'Keefe reached out to you.
They did.
And what was that, in regard to, what was that conversation?
They reached out. They were at McCarthy's, the bar in Canton Center, and they wanted me to come up. And I was saying, I didn't want to. I wanted to stay in because there was a storm coming. And then he called me a pussy, and I, sorry, I can't let that happen. So I had to go.
Fair enough.
So I had to go up there, and
Do you recall who it was that called you that?
it was Michael Camerano.
Let the record reflect. Okay. You receive that text and you go to CF McCarthy's, is that right?
That's right.
And you mentioned that's in Camden Center.
Yes.
And about how far a drive is that from your house to CF McCarthy's?
2.5, maybe 3 miles at best.
And do you recall about what time it was that you received that now infamous text and you go make your way to CF McCarthy's?
Yes, it was about 20 past 8.
Is that a place that you had been to before?
Not often, but I have been there before.
When you arrive to CF McCarthy's, who, if anyone, that you know is sort of there when you get there?
John O'Keefe and Michael Camerano.
And if you could, for the jury, just describe sort of what you know of sort of the inside of CF McCarthy's as far as you walk in the door and what is the layout of the bar?
Walk in the door, go to the left, and the bar's right in front of you. It's a big square bar. And then the bathrooms are in the back, and there's tables off to the left.
And where in relation to the bar and the tables and what you've described were Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Camerano when you were there?
And walking to the left, they were on my left.
And the area where you came up to and where they were, is that essentially sort of the same area that you and the group that you were with stayed in for most of the night?
Yes.
And if you recall, so you went out to a bar, fair to say you had something, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what you were drinking that night?
I believe it was a Bud Light.
Do you recall whether that was draft or a bottle or something else?
It was a bottle.
That's sort of typically what you would drink when you go out?
Back then, yes.
And with regard to Mr. Camerano and Mr. O'Keefe, do you recall what they were drinking that night?
I believe the same as me. I believe. I wasn't much paying attention to that, but that's what they normally would drink.
With the with the court's permission, if I could publish to the jury portions of what's been marked as Exhibit 50 to CF McCarthy's video.
Okay.
Now, Ms. Roberts, direct your attention to the screen and what's been marked as Exhibit 50. Also, I believe there should be a laser pointer on the desk in front of you. So if you just click on that button and point it in a direction, you can sort of highlight it. So if I could ask you, first of all, do you recognize what's depicted up on the screen as Exhibit 50?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be, sir?
I see John right there and Michael right there.
And does this appear to be consistent with what you recollect as far as the interior of C.F. McCarthy's on January 20th?
Yes.
And this area that you just pointed out to as far as where Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Camerano is that the area where you just testified to they essentially were during the time that you were there?
Yes, it is.
Now, with respect to Mr. O'Keefe, you can see sort of what he's wearing in this video, is that correct?
Yes.
And the clothing, at least as far as you can see, is that the clothing that you observed Mr. O'Keefe to be wearing that night?
Yes, that was what he was wearing.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, I would ask just to play this from the 34:10 mark until 35. Pause there just a moment. The gentleman that just came in through the door, do you recognize him, sir?
Yes, I do.
And who do you recognize him?
That's me.
So that was about the time that you were around, is that correct?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if you could just continue it for another 33 seconds or so. Directing your attention still up to the screen, Mr. Roberts, there's another individual around yourself, Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Camerano, is that correct?
Yes.
And do you recognize who that person is?
At the time, I didn't know. He doesn't look the same in this picture right now, but I believe it's Sully.
And that's someone at this time on January 28th, you didn't know who that was?
No, I did not.
You now do?
I do now, yes.
Okay. Who do you know him to be in relation to sort of yourself and Mr. Camerano and Mr. O'Keefe?
Well, I know his son plays baseball on my son's baseball team. And I met him that night. We were talking.
This would have been the first time that you had met this person you now know as Sully.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Now, with reference to this evening, at some point, who, if anyone else, sort of came into the bar and joined your group?
Karen Reed.
And that was sometime after you had initially arrived, is that correct?
I believe so, yes. It was after I had already been there, I believe.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could, from the same exhibit, but going to the fourth video down. If you could just pause. Now, as far as Ms. Reed, do you see Ms. Reed in this video?
Yes, I do.
And if you could, just using that laser pointer, directed your attention to where you see Ms. Reed.
Right there.
Now, Mr. Roberts, you were, fair to say, a little reluctant to come out that evening, is that correct?
That's correct.
And as far as timing, about how long was it that you stayed at C.F. McCarthy's before you left?
It's a good hour. 1 hour.
An hour or so?
So I was home by about 10:15. I was home.
And if you recall, about how many beers did you have while you were there?
Probably 3 or 4.
And what you were drinking, was that, as far as amount was concerned, was that the same, less, more so than sort of the other people that you were with?
Probably one more. I would think. I kind of drank them kind of fast because I was taking off.
So you may have lapped them by a round or something?
Sure. Yes.
Now, you mentioned what you and Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Camerano were drinking. What, if anything, did you observe Ms. Reed to be drinking at that time?
It was a clear glass with probably a lime in it. I'm assuming a vodka tonic, maybe. I'm not positive what it was, but it was a clear glass with.
And from your prior sort of interactions or socialization with Miss Reed, is that something that she would typically drink?
Yes, I guess I would say.
And about what time was it, again, that you left?
I think I left about 10 o'clock. It took me a few minutes to get home, so.
And with regard to when you left, did you sort of announce that to anybody, or how did you?
I usually don't, because then I'll have to deal with it again, but when we walked out, me and Michael Camerano, I believe, about the same time. I might have been a minute or two before him, that's all.
So you sort of exit and just sort of leave, and then at some point in time, around the time that you left, Mr. Camerano left as well.
That's right.
And Ms. Gilman, from what's up here as Exhibit 50, if I could ask you to just play from this point till about 22 minutes and 50 seconds. And thank you, Ms. Gilman. You can take that. So the camera kind of caught your goodbye, correct?
I believe so, yes.
So fair to say that was about the time that you left.
I would say.
And with regard to during the time that you were at McCarthy's with this group, including yourself, Mr. O'Keefe, Mr. Camerano, and Ms. Reed, how would you describe sort of the general tone or demeanor of the group while you were there?
Everything very, very normal. Just a few friends out having some drinks. Nothing that stands out.
No arguing, no anything?
No.
And as far as the clothing that I asked you about with regard to what Mr. O'Keefe was wearing, when you were there that night, did you notice anything as far as tears in the clothing or any dishevelment, anything like that?
No, I didn't notice anything.
And when you were there and you were talking to Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, sort of injuries or anything about him did you note as far as his face or anything else that you could see?
Nothing, no.
Now, once you left, where did you go?
I went home.
And do you recall when you got home, I think you've already said it, but about what time was it that you got home?
But I think 10:15 would be my best guess.
When you got home, who, if anyone else from your house, from your family, was there?
I believe my wife and kids were there. They're up in bed, but they weren't downstairs. So.
And at some point, did you go to bed that evening?
I did.
And about what time was that?
Probably I saw the snow start coming down. Probably 11:30, 12, maybe midnight.
And about the time you mentioned that you had been aware that there was a storm coming in, correct?
Yes.
About the time that you went to bed around midnight or so, what, if anything, did you observe? Did you look outside or see anything?
It was snowing. So
And in relation to that, what, if anything, could you hear while you were in the house sort of making your way to bed?
The wind was hitting the windows. You just knew it was a storm.
Now, you go to sleep with your wife, correct?
That's right, yes.
And at some point the next morning on the 29th, what, if anything, is it that wakes you up?
A voice on my wife's phone was yelling, like screaming, frantic it wasn't, and that woke me up. So I asked, what is that?
And initially, did you recognize that voice on your wife's phone?
I didn't recognize it, but I just couldn't make out the words. But it was just a screaming.
And could you hear anything you couldn't make out the words?
I couldn't make out no.
And at some point, did you recognize that voice or come to find out who was on the other end of the phone?
Yes, I did. It was Karen Reed.
And about what time of the morning was that?
I see 5 o'clock. would be a good guess.
And as far as you wake up, you hear the screaming, what happened then?
My wife gets up. She starts getting all crazy and then putting her clothes on and running out. I'm telling her not to go because the weather was pretty bad at that point. And of course, she goes,
So she doesn't listen to you and she continues to get dressed and go?
yes.
And when you say the weather was pretty bad at that point, can you expound upon that as far as what you saw?
It was snowing. It was snowing. It was very windy. It was snowing heavy.
And your wife, Kerry, did she say where she was going?
She said, John's missing, and I got to go. I don't know exactly what she said, where she was going.
And from the time that you initially sort of wake up around 5 a.m. or so to the screaming on the phone to the time that your wife, Ms. Roberts, leaves your house, how much time had elapsed between those two things?
By the time I woke up until she left, I'd say 15 minutes.
And when your wife leaves the house and she's driving, is that correct?
She was.
And do you recall which car she took?
She took her car, Ford Explorer.
And that's an SUV, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what color the Ford Explorer was?
It's gray.
Now, after she leaves, when is the next time that you spoke to your wife?
She called me. She called me on the phone. I forget. I can't really recall exact times now. They tell me that they found John. He's in the ambulance. They bring him to the hospital, and she was going to get Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe.
And by Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe, who did you understand that?
John's parents.
And did you know John's parents?
I did.
And did you know where they lived?
I did.
And where did they live?
In Braintree.
So your wife calls you, tells you Mr. O'Keefe's in an ambulance and she's going to Braintree to get his parents.
That's right.
And after you heard that, what is it that you did next?
I believe I snowblowed the driveway, got it ready because I knew she was going to come home in a mood.
Clear your driveway.
So she could, yes, because it was, yes.
Now, when you go out to clear the driveway at the time that your wife calls you, about how much snow was in the driveway at that point?
I'd say there was drifts of at least a foot or so. It was pretty good. It was a lot. Tough to get the car in.
And if you know about what time was it that your wife returned home that day?
8 o'clock? I don't know exact time. But
And when you say 8 o'clock, you mean 8 o'clock in the morning or night?
a.m.
8 a.m. If I may have just one moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
No further questions for this witness, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Roberts, you and I have never met, correct?
Correct.
That night that you went out to CF McCarthy's, where you were sort of pressured or goaded into going out, you did get a chance to observe John O'Keefe at the bar, correct?
I did, yes.
Did you ever see him wearing a puffy jacket?
Never.
Did you ever see a puffy jacket around his chair that he was sitting in?
Not that I recall, no.
Ever see him holding a puffy jacket?
No.
Now, you noticed on the video, one of the last videos that Mr. Lally played for you, that prior to your making the Irish exit there, you did have some interaction with Karen Reed, correct?
I believe so at the end.
You saw that the two of you were at one point face to face.
I did for a brief.
Yes, it was, maybe 10 or 20 seconds.
Okay,
That sound fair?
it does.
And when you were face to face, you were looking at her and she was looking at you, correct?
Yes.
And there was some type of interchange between the two of you?
Maybe I was just saying bye. I don't recall. I don't
Yeah, you
know.
probably don't remember the specifics of
No, I don't.
what the conversation was, but there appeared to be some type of small conversation.
I saw her from the video, yes.
And while you were speaking to her, you had no indication that she was slurring her words in any way, correct?
I didn't think so, no.
No. Her eyes didn't appear to be bloodshot and glassy, correct?
Correct.
She wasn't swaying or stumbling in any way, correct?
Correct.
She didn't appear to be confused in her thinking or her speech.
She did not.
She appeared to be normal, correct?
Yes.
There was nothing about her demeanor or her interaction with you that would lead you to believe that she was under the influence of alcohol at that time.
No, not.
And during the time that you spent with them at the bar, you didn't see any evidence of any problems between Karen and John O'Keefe?
I did not.
No arguments or bickering or anything like that?
No.
Neither one of them was complaining about the other, correct?
Correct.
Were you able to see any of the affection between the two of them, either physically or with regard to what they were saying?
I didn't see any of it.
All right.
Any.
It seems like you were more concentrated on.
I was talking with the guy.
We're talking with Mike at the bar.
So,
But you had known Karen, or at least known of her, and had some interactions with her for, I believe your testimony was about a year or two.
yes.
During that time, there was some interaction with Karen at your house because there were pickups and drop-offs that had to be made.
Yes.
And you would see that, Karen had been to your house when you were there, specifically to pick up your son, correct?
Yes.
How often would that occur?
I don't recall. Not. I don't think.
Both times?
Maybe. And she.
And she would pick him up to either take him to school or sports or some activity,
I
correct?
believe it was normally like the baseball, maybe. I believe. I don't know. I don't arrange that stuff. My wife takes care of that, so I don't arrange for the pickups, and it's usually my wife does that. So I can't tell you exactly what it was for.
No, I understand. I'm just getting the fact that you were present when these pickups occurred.
Yes.
And that would be because Karen was sort of shuttling, either Kaylee or Patrick to events, correct?
Correct.
And when there was an intersection specifically with regard to Patrick and your son, she would take both of them, correct?
Yes.
And from your observations of Karen Reed during that 1 or 2 years that you had come into contact with her, the contact you had was mainly surrounding what happened with the kids, correct?
Yeah, I would say mainly.
And she appeared to be responsible, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
The objection sustained. Ask it differently, Ms. Giannetti.
Sure. She appeared to be caring toward the kids, did she not?
Objection.
Overruled.
May we approach?
Okay. Jurors, feel free to stand up and stretch.
Just one question for you, just to sort of alter the last question that I asked you. From your read on this, it appeared to you as though Karen was caring for the kids and caring about them, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Okay. Any follow-up, Mr. Lally?
Briefly, just one question, sir. As far as your observations of Ms. Reed in regard to Mr. O'Keefe and in regard to the children, that was what you observed, correct?
That's right.
And so as far as what, if anything, went on behind closed doors or in their relationship, you weren't really privy to that?
I was not.
Okay. Nothing further.
All right, Mr. Roberts, you are all set, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.